Hello, it is vlog 13. I think I've only missed 1 week, which is pretty good. Um, just to reintroduce myself, I have ME. It's myalgic encephalomyelitis. I've had it for a couple years, but I've been sick for about 6 years. Um, this year's almost halfway gone. Um, I'm no longer shocked by how fast time moves. Um, my nephew just turned 30 2 days ago. My sister is closing in on 50. Um, I am 5 months and 23 days away from being 40. I don't look it, but I'm old. you know, when I first got sick, I was, 33, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh, 40 is a long time away. I remember that thinking that because, you see that movie When Harry Met Sally. There's a scene where Sally is like freaking out. She's I think they're at the airport or something like that. She's at the airport with Billy Crystal, and she's having like some sort of existential issue. I think she's married at this point, or maybe close to married, and she's crying. She's like, "I'm gonna be 40," and Billy Crystal, like, there's a beat, and Billy Crystal goes, "In 7 years." So it just shows you that like 40 is like this weird cultural, which was, it must be modern, like very new, that we've put like this importance on 40 because we're like, well, it's halfway through your middle age. I was like, well, median age is like 75, 76. So like I was already middle aged a couple of years ago. 40 is just a round number. I remember when my dad turned 40. He's about 5 years older than I was, and so I was like about five, or just about five, a little older than five. And at the time when he was turning 40, I thought, holy shit. I thought, my God, this guy is ancient. And, you know, it, Asians just look younger for some reason. Maybe not all of them, but like on generally speaking, I don't know what it is, but Asians, it is a stereotype that just happens to be quasi true, that like Asians do not like look their age. So I've looked this, for example, I've looked like this for a very long time. I think, when I was thinner, because I was more active, and been in better shape, you I was always mistaken for a student. I used to work at schools. So like at the beginning of the year, I would have to get my ID picture taken, and they'd be like, and so what is your name? And I would, Steve, and my last name. And they'd be like, I don't see what grade are you in? I'd be like, well, I graduated, like almost 20 years ago. So, I'm double whatever the oldest age. I mean, I'm in grade 34 or whatever, whatever. So it's like they couldn't believe that. And like, oh, but then I realized, I was like, I wonder if older people like also look at me and go like, oh, he's so young. So like that was always the thing too. Like, do people who are way older than me look at me and think I'm young? Because I used to visit my aunt all the time. This is when I lived in Connecticut, and R.I.P. Aunt Lee. Um, and she was telling me, and this is when she was like in her 80s, and she was like, and I didn't think she was serious at the time, but like she was like a tough old broad too. Like she was like one of those like really just like, you know depression era kind of, like, not mean, just like very like, like she had grit to her. Like all my aunts were like that. I love That's why I'm half Italian, so like half, which is weird. Which is, I know it's like a half Italian, half Japanese, but like half Italian. So like all my Italian aunts were like just like these very like gritty, like very like, but they were sweet ladies. They were just very gritty. That's how I would describe them, because they just had so much. Like they never, like they didn't believe in therapy basically. So like everything was just very like I'm gonna take it out on cooking or something. I don't know, but she was a nice lady. But anyways, I remember us having a conversation with her, and we were talking about I was this well before I was 32. I was like 25, and she was like, do you ever? I was like, do you ever like think like what would you do to like just be like my age again? She was like, Steve, I'll tell you what is like I would murder everyone on this block just to be 60 again. And I was like, God damn. I was like, that's fucking. I was like, are you joking? And she was, and she was like, I don't know. She's like, I'd like to think I was, but because she was just very cognizant of like the difference between like being like 80 something and being even 60, like 60, like because I was talking to my dad, and my dad was telling me how like because my dad's like 73, 74 now, and he was telling me how like, oh, you wouldn't believe the difference between 70 and 60. And I was like, well, what's like, because you don't think of it that way, you know you think of it like, I was like, oh shit, like Obama's like 60 something, and I'm like, god damn, you know and I was like, oh, but he's like still like doing things. But then like you look at like someone like in their 70s, like I don't know, like Biden or Trump, and they're like kind of like decrepit, right? I'm not saying I'm not being trying to be ageist. I'm just like I guess there is a difference. And so, but then like when you're chronically ill, like you feel older than you are, and even look sometimes. Um, and so I don't know where I was going with any of that, but like anyways, um, this will be actually be. I always say this is going to be a short vlog, but this will actually be a short vlog because I'm just going to like read a poem. I used to write a lot of poetry when I was younger, and I think I don't know when I wrote this poem. Um, I can't remember if I wrote this in 2021 or 22 or 23. I don't remember. I've been writing since about 2009 poetry, and at first I hated it, but then I realized, oh, you could do a lot of cool things with it. And so, like, I've had some poetry published on like e-zines or in like actual like little tiny mags or something like that, and that's always like a thrill. And then I just stopped sending stuff out because I was like, well, I guess someone liked it, and I decided maybe I'll just read one for fun, and then maybe I'll talk about like what I was going through when I was reading it or writing it rather. So this is just a poem and little else, basically. So let me bring it up. So the poem is called Instructions for the Deprogramming of a Severe Malcontent. And I suppose I got that from Freud when he's talking. I'm gonna butcher the name of this the paper on it or the book, but it's I think it's called Society and Its Malcontents, and I always like that word malcontent as a way of describing someone. Um, but anyways, so I'll start reading. First fall prostrate, like bad days slouching into an inevitability void after years of anti-everything, aloof in a simulacrum, estranged from lustral healing. Then endure the crushing catharsis of past fleeting like drunken fireflies, their lights false as your memories, so unlike their once romantic dead dynasty sign no appeal, now shadows hunting spaces in which to be recalled at all. On the darkest night of your recovery comes clarity as you peer out over an emotional fault line where truce has been called and all known casualties are versions of you in uniforms, government issued like your survivor's guilt. After your fog-logged mind reemerges from the fugue state of trauma, clearing perimeters like the Secret Service, deeply dilated inside highly medicated spaces, it accepts a 2-ton dump truck with hefty bags of hurt backing up, reincarnated in recycled thoughts like, to not have kids was not my choice, being one such way perpetual pain is a form of pollution. For your final trick, you try falling ass backwards into an abyss which has changed its password, requiring special characters to gain access. Actual reality quickening as if an acid trip called your life had begun to level out and settle you down with the other bursted bubbles awaiting evaporation into an atmosphere, which reminds you of a heaven you'd go to when the other one's full. Um, I think I wrote this when I think I wrote this in 2021. Um, I was still going to like a lot of therapy sessions, and it felt like I was deprogramming myself from a lot of poor habits, and I really liked. I wrote the last line first. This was the first thing I wrote. Um, awaiting evaporation into an atmosphere, which reminds you of a heaven you go to when the other one's full. And I think the idea was that, not to dissect poems, I think it's up to, I never like people explaining it, but like whatever. When you're trying to like heal from something, or um, when you're trying to get better or well, whether it's mental or physical. In my case, at the time, it was like a mental, like emotional stuff, and I remember thinking like, uh, wouldn't it be interesting if like you had to settle for your second like best, like your second option. You know how like you have like certain schools, like this is my backup plan. You know, I thought like, well, what if heaven was like that, or whatever your um, Valhalla was, right? Whatever your when you cross the finish line and you're kind of like, I've been unburdened by this, and I've been released from my earthly imprisonment of the pain of my past or something. What if you had to settle for like the second best option because the other one was already full? And then I started thinking, well, that's interesting too. Like the idea that like heaven was just, which I'm an atheist, but uh, like what if heaven was full? Like, is there another one you go to? Like you have to settle for? And so like I was really just talking about the process of trauma and healing and memory, and like I hear survivor's guilt about it, and sort of the, here I'm talking about like, this is even before I had like brain fog. Like I was talking about like just the non-clarity that you have sometimes during, you can't remember what's a false memory, what's a real memory, did you remember it correctly, does your brain sort of misinterpret the past because you've told your story so many times to yourself that you think it's true. um like this one, like to not have kids was not my choice, is kind of like something I feel kind of deeply, because I feel like I didn't want to have kids because I didn't want to. I felt like my illness was a curse almost, and I would pass it down to my kids. You keep hearing like, well, depression or whatever is a genetic thing, and I had watched that documentary about like these triplets who were raised separately, and two of them were kind of raised like normatively, and one of them was raised in like a really like shitty household in a different class even, and like he wound up turning out very like poorly, like, definitely different than the other ones, and he couldn't handle like like life basically, and he was they all had depression, but he had it the worst. And so like I wondered if I had kids, would that be the case, like where I would just perpetuate the cycle of whatever I was going through. And yeah, the perpetual pain is a form of pollution. Um, and by that, I guess I meant toxicity. Anyways, there's no point in like going over the whole fucking thing. You get the idea. But yeah, that's pretty much just. I literally had little else to talk about. I just wanted to share a poem. It doesn't have much to do with my MECFS, really. I guess it could be applicable. But I think that was more about um, my prior life to illness. Because originally when I got sick in 2018, I thought I actually did think it was more had to do with like my nervous system and stuff like that. And I thought, well, because I wasn't having fatigue issues and I wasn't having all these other like symptoms that I had now. I actually had more symptoms then, but they weren't as debilitating and they weren't as disabling. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have much going on this weekend. I think I'm going to see my dad maybe next week or the week after. I haven't seen him in like 5 years. A lot of that had to do with the pandemic. A lot of that has to do with he lives in another state. A lot of that had to do with me getting sick, and then I couldn't do much. But yeah, I think he'll be coming up at some point, and I look forward to seeing him. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So take care, and I'll see you next vlog, whoever the hell watches these things.